So I want to kick off with an event. There's a meeting by the San Diego Amiga Users Group in April 1988. What happens is a couple of Commodore engineers drop in unannounced to the San Diego Amiga Users Group, unannounced, and they say, hey, we're on our way to West Germany. And they unveil an Amiga 3000 prototype. It's got a 68020 in it. It's got 2 million, it can do 2 million colors at 640 by 400. And it's running some version of Amiga OS 2.0 that has like 3D objects in it. And then as soon as they've appeared, they disappear because they got to get to Germany. And there is crazy interest in this. Like BBS is going crazy. People ringing Westchester going, tell us about this new amazing Amiga. And turns out to be an April Fool's joke played by the LA Amiga Users Group on the San Diego Amiga Users Group. So I briefly, when I was going through all the sources for this talk, I was mentioning a guy called Jimmy Ma, who is the digital antiquarian. He, apart from writing a really great book on Amiga called The Future Was Here, he's got an amazing computer history and gaming blog in terms of just doing really in-depth historical details. Anyway, but by coincidence, roughly at this time, Commodore does start work on both the real Amiga 3000 as well as the next generation Amiga architecture, otherwise known as AAA. So this is part two of my Amiga's Forgotten Futures talk. Where we left it previously was just discussing several decisions that were made by Commodore through the 80s. So in terms of launching the Amiga, whether it should be hitting the home or the business market, whether they should enter the workstation market with Ranger, what approach Commodore should take when they're making their distinct home and business segments for the Amiga. And then also looking at what they could do with software developer adoption to help drive Amiga's success. So what did follow in the back end of the 80s was a golden age for Amiga as it found its way into the home, as well as finding a real strong place in professional video production. And as the 90s loomed, Commodore had to really decide on the product direction to drive profitability and what role the PC plays in that, what role the Amiga plays on that moving forward. So in part two, we're going to cover, as I was mentioning before, AAA. We're going to cover Amiga in the age of multimedia. We're going to talk about a change in direction in terms of roadmap plans, and also going to cover off Hombre. Part of the original interest in doing this talk was in a local users group that I was presenting to in Melbourne. There's a bit of confusion between PowerPC in terms of its role, as well as then AAA and Hombre, and people confusing AAA and Hombre together and all those sorts of things. So that's part of why I actually did this talk. And as I mentioned in the first part, I don't actually have time to hit on a few key historical areas just due to time constraints. So first off, kicking off talking about AAA and what was the advanced Amiga architecture. The biggest strength for Amiga, which is its custom chips that it can offload, workload to, is its biggest weakness because it constrains compatibility. And the design goal for AAA was to exceed VGA. Amiga is seeing a threat from PC coming in, and so they really want the next set of Amigas not to meet VGA but be superior to it. And so they wanted to come out with a chipset that would support future Amigas for the next 4 to 5 years. And the idea was that it would be used in a range of different Amigas, everything from consoles to workstations. And so key capabilities were that they had a scalable design where you could double up on certain chips and double your graphics bandwidth to do a really high-end Amiga. It featured 24-bit color, higher memory bandwidth, higher resolutions, more sound capability, so 8 times 16-bit sound rather than 4 times 8-bit sound. And new graphics and sound interface and APIs underpinned by Amiga OS 3.0, which really that's in reference to obviously when they came out with the Amiga 3000 2.0 and ECS and everything. there were some real compatibility issues at the API side of things. So when they're thinking about AAA, they were the strategy was really about revolution, not evolution. And what that means is not overemphasizing compatibility with AAA. So they had 4 new Amiga chips in a low-end single system, or you could double up on some of the chips and have a dual system, as I was saying before. And the first system that they wanted to release with AAA would be a high-end Amiga. And some of the thinking, and this evolved, by the way, it didn't start off this way at the outset of AAA, but then as AAA evolved, they went, okay, how we're actually going to solve the compatibility issue is by putting an option card in a system to give OCS, ECS compatibility. So a couple of related projects. I didn't mention NIX, which is kind of like the prototype system for AAA, but there's one called Accutiator, which is a modular system for AAA chips that would also, so you could plug in elements of the architecture, including the CPU. So originally some of the work with Accutiator, they were looking at a 68040 based AAA system, but later on they were talking about pulling out the CPU and putting in RISC CPUs to play with. And then another one I've just written here, which will obviously come into the story, is Pandora, otherwise known as AA or the AGA chipset. So next couple of slides, I've got Dave Haney talking about AAA.
That everyone likes is the AAA system. That was called the Advanced Amiga architecture. It consisted of systems built from either 4 or 6 Amiga chips, brand new chips. Every single one was brand new, all done in 1 micron CMOS. You had a 64. You had a 32-bit blitter bus, 32 or 64-bit graphics bus. The blitter bus and the graphics bus could be separated. It could support regular DRAM. It could also support VRAM. So you basically weren't going to slow your processor down much to have 1024 by 768 or whatever it could support. I think it could go to like 2000 by something. I forget the exact resolutions, but I had once we planar pixels, you could have up to 10-bit planes. You could have ham 10. You could have chunky ham, which sounds like a meal. It also had 2 different kinds of what they called hybrid pixels, which work a little bit like the compression, like the DCT cells in an MPEG video, in that you've got a restricted boundary of a small number of pixels that have their own palette. And then you move to the next one, and it's got its own palette. You move to the next one, it's got its own palette. So it was a way of compressing video to use much less bandwidth to support something that looked better. Kind of the same idea of ham, but a completely different way of doing it than ham did.
Ham and eggs, or what?
Ham and eggs. We had we had 8. We had 8 audio channels with full left-right panning. They were also 16-bit. There was a way to have a video digitizer with some extra parts. It wasn't absolutely built in, but there was kind of this DMA channel set up. So if you wanted to build a system with a video digitizer, you could do that.
So basically, AAA had a brand new set of chips. Andrea, Linda, Monica, Mary. And I've kind of written the OCS/AGA equivalents on the side there. So Andrea is really taking requests, basically taking requests from the CPU, DMA requests, filling up chip RAM, basically feeding Monica, which is building raster lines, and then over to Linda, which is the line buffer going into Monica, which is then doing the pixels and the different graphics modes. And then obviously Mary's the audio and peripheral control, so polar equivalent effectively. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, the concept is that you could double up your Linda and Monica's to get to a 64-bit system, which really it's estimated to probably be somewhere between 12 and 20 times more powerful than ECS from a bandwidth perspective. So overall, pretty cool. the question that Commodore really had as they're developing AAA is how much should we invest right now for, let's say, the upcoming Amiga 3000 versus building peripherals for the Amiga 2000 versus developing for AAA on what's next, right? And so there was a dilemma there, and really AAA really is needing 3 engineers per chip. So there's really they really need 12 engineers for it to happen, within the scheduled time. The other question is, do we continue to use Commodore Semiconductor Group to manufacture our next generation chipset? Because whilst in the past, when things are NMOS, HMOS, they were very used to essentially both the style of manufacturing and the process, but they're now starting to struggle with keeping up with more modern fabrication that you're seeing other chip fabs being able to do. So question is really, do we outsource chip fab? So 1988 and 1989, both revenues are pretty solid. So you can see 870 million in 88 and then 1.1 million in 1989, which they haven't had since 1984. But then you can see the profit as well back into 6.55% in 1988, 6% in 1989. Things are really starting to look a lot better for Commodore. Gould promotes Mehdi Ali to being the president of Commodore in 1989 and the CEO in 1990. I suspect most people in the room may know who he is, but if you didn't, you probably worked it out from listening to David Pleasance complain about him for half an hour that wasn't a well-liked guy. Frank Leonardi and Max Toy basically both leave, and Harold Copperman comes in to fix US sales. Also, Henri Rubin at this time becomes head of engineering as well as the COO in Westchester. Now, because Ali is this Axeman, Gould sees shades of Tramiel in Ali, and in a way that Gould likes, as in this is a hard man that can run the business kind of thing. But really, at the end of the day, if you look at how Ali is doing it, it's all about solving cash flow problems, right? Cut expenditure to become profitable. And what he does is he cuts R&D to 1.7% of revenue, which is very, very low. And also, at this time, Commodore was receiving a lot of flack in the press around executive pay of both those two gentlemen. So...
it's like the reverse of Apple, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Taking $1 or whatever, yeah. So the design work on AAA is going very, very slowly because they aren't really staffing it. So they need 12 engineers. They got 6, and a number of them are part-time. So there's one engineer that's working on AAA chips that's also working on the 4510 processor and also working on ECS. So he's really not just focused on working on... So really, and so the project starts to slip at the rate of 1 week per week. Also, as I was mentioning before, the Commodore Semiconductor Group is struggling to keep up with the manufacturing process that they're targeting. So then the next question, and this was, there was a few folks in the peanut gallery that threw this at me in the first meeting. Could we broaden Amiga's footprint in the market with OEM relationships? And how do we respond to a rapidly evolving market? So our friend Mehdi Ali. So in 1989, Amiga, or Commodore, looked at an OEM agreement with Sun Microsystems around a potential line of low-end Unix workstations based on Amex. Ali steps in at the end of the negotiation, doubles the asking price. That was the end of the negotiation. This wasn't the only time that Ali did this. So a couple of years later, in 1993, Commodore actually had an opportunity to OEM Amiga with Epson. So Epson would do all the localization for Amiga OS, and they would sell it as an Epson, but it would basically be an Amiga in Japan. Ali was brought in to finalise the deal, and he started telling Epson all the things that they're doing wrong and all the things that have to change. And so obviously there's a loss of face, negotiation over. However, the negotiation team that's been working on Epson's side of the fence suddenly all get turned over. New negotiation team comes in. What happens? Exactly the same thing. And exactly the same result. So,
What's the common thread?
yeah. Guy wasn't too great at OEM relationships. Yes, sorry.
Do you know what the fallout from Sun's side was of that?
No.
Okay, well, that's still their resolve to get in bed with OCL and Sun and the Spark partnership. Right. Because at the time all they had was the Sun Hydra 380, which was their top-end workstation, basically, which is I think 25 megahertz of 30, 6282, and up to 32 meg of memory, and 4 and maybe 256 kilo later, much later on. Frank offer no audio, no nothing, and Sun was 4.11 U1. It was really primitive compared to what the A3000 could do.
Sun was never SGI.
Well, look, Sun. So kind of in the period where this was going on, like there was a pretty big religious. Actually, this is going to really take me off topic. So I'm an ex-Sun guy. I worked at Sun for a reasonable period of time. I can talk to this topic, but I'll probably do it after the talk if that's okay. So the 80s are coming to a close, and it's the turn of a decade. PCs are getting video, PCs are getting sound. What's the big buzzword in the industry?
GPU? Multimedia.
Multimedia, yeah. So what's the key technology associated with multimedia?
CD?
Yeah. So there's pleas from Commodore's developers, in fact, probably industry-wide, about adoption of CDs, right? Like how can we use CDs to support games, richer media in games, let's say. And really, this brings Commodore also a new set of decisions, right? So with this big industry trend for multimedia, how do we maximise our opportunity here? And look, Commodore had really big tickets on themselves because of the success of the Amiga in the video industry. So they're like, who else would you look at, when it comes to multimedia? Like, we are the guys. And so do we release new multimedia products? Do we add capability to our existing install base of Amigas? Are there other market considerations to this emerging multimedia trend? Fad, perhaps. In 1989, their basically product management teams came to management to say, hey, what we really should do is create some add-ons for the Amiga 500, the Amiga 2000, and so on. And the idea wasn't dismissed, but they kind of went, you know what, could Commodore really redefine the market? How about Commodore Dynamic Total Vision, or CDTV? So Commodore had seen what Philips was doing with the CDI, and what they're starting to think about is if we put a Commodore, if we put an Amiga in the lounge room, but we don't call it an Amiga, looks like a hi-fi component, this thing could be the backbone of an entertainment system. And also, if we build it the right way, then no one has to understand computers. We don't even have to mention the word computer. We don't have to mention the word Amiga, right? This is really what was the thinking behind the CDTV. And so Commodore go and hire Nolan Bushnell to be their multimedia CDTV spokesman. So they announced the CDTV at CES mid-1990. It's the all-in-one media appliance. It can play audio CDs, educational software, interactive encyclopedia and games, all from a CD-ROM. And as I was saying before, they're really targeting a casual user, not a computer user. And it's the future of home computing. Unfortunately, it gurus 3 times through the demo. And really, a lot of the press that were at CES were going, FM Towns looks really interesting, but what's happening with the CDTV, it didn't get good reviews. So some decisions for Commodore. How should we price the CDTV? So Philips sell the CDI for $7.99. What can this new market bear while considering the competition? Another question is, what are the key launch titles? What killer apps will grab the market's attention when we launch this thing? And remember that they're trying to not sell this as an Amiga, right? So after being announced at CES, the CDTV became generally available in '91 and sold at $999, so $200 more than the Philips offering. And even Bushnell was kind of like, that's a lot of money. But when you then add all the optional add-ons, you know, the monitor, the floppy, keyboard, mouse, it's close to $2,500, which is pretty expensive. Now, mind you, they really are focused on just having it as a unit. And there's only really 50 titles at launch. They had been targeting 100, but they only got 50. Funnily enough, Gail Wellington was actually quite involved with the CDTV, but didn't get titles in time. It's probably more a timing thing than anything else. But nothing was really a killer title for the CDTV.
Defender of the Crown as well, right?
Defender of the Crown too, yeah. And then Philips CDI, really that sold 10 to 1 as many as the CDTV, but even that wasn't a smash hit really. But it had Mist and Seventh Guest that really propelled it for the people that bought it. So it didn't end well. Prices eventually dropped to $499, and actually eventually they were giving them away with Amiga 3000s at some point. So anyway, then brings us to the Amiga 3000. So Commodore hold a special event called Multimedia Live, and Harold Copperman, who's just joined. So ex-IBM for a ton of years, then worked at Apple very briefly, and then straight over to Commodore. Harold Copperman says on stage, "Hey, I'm a Commodore. Just as multimedia becomes the most important item in the marketplace, once again I'm with the leader. Of course, in this industry, industry, a leader doesn't have any followers. He just has a lot of other companies trying to pass him by. But take a look. The other companies are talking multimedia, but they're not doing it. They're a long way behind Commodore, not even close." So this is the Amiga 3000. Now, I said for those of you that, some of you wouldn't have been at the start of my life, I'm not really a Commodore guy, but I actually really love this computer. Like, I think it's a beautiful computer. Yeah. Yeah. Yep.
Was that Australian prices? I can't remember.
No, these are US prices. Yeah.
That's why I couldn't afford it. I bought a Mac instead.
Yeah. You can see that compared to, let's say, an Amiga 2000, it is a step up. So like much higher levels of RAM support, inbuilt SCSI, ECS, Zyro 3. And look, I think it's it was definitely seen when it was launched as a really like a premium, a pretty serious machine.
It still had custom chips, didn't it?
Yeah.
GPU.
No, and look, the challenge that the Amiga 3000 had was obviously Amiga had created its identity in terms of video production, and then Video Toaster really wasn't fitting in it. It didn't get launched with a CD-ROM, and then the Amiga OS 2.0 compatibilities at the start of Amiga OS getting launched. There was a lot of what was happening was a lot of developers for the Amiga had been using undocumented API calls, and so when they moved to Amiga OS 2.0, they were having issues there, deprecated. As I was mentioning, Mehdi Ali had been slashing R&D, and Amiga 3000 was late, a little bit late in terms of when they started designing it versus when they launched it. Big part of that was really Dave Haney, in that he was the chief engineer on the Amiga 3000, but at times where he probably should have been working on that, he was working on like accelerators to the Amiga 2000. So just, once again, the theme of being split across multiple areas. AAA at this point is getting really, really late in terms of they've had a few versions of it, but really it's not keeping up. The VGA is moving quite quickly, so the goalposts are now moving to 1600 by 1200, and they're originally looking with AAA at 1024 and 1280 resolutions. So the market is moving quickly. Henri Rubin basically gets promoted out of his job because he hasn't really delivered anything, and Ali hires Bill Sidness of ex-IBM. So he was the lead on the PC Junior. And Bill brings in a guy called Lou Egerbrecht. Now, in a nutshell, Bill was not very well liked or respected, but the Commodore guys were okay with Lou, as in he seemed to actually know what he was doing a little bit. But it was a pretty difficult time. Decisions for Commodore: do they keep going with AAA? Do they actually lift the design goals for AAA? Do they increase R&D investment? And also, what are they going to have as a follow-on to the Amiga 3000? So these are really key questions at this point in time.
An absolute disaster. I mean, I'll give you an example. It's all this is in my book anyway, but let me give you an example, right? He recruited a new head of engineering, Bill Sidness. Bill came from IBM, and Bill was responsible for the PC Junior, which was a disaster in itself, right?
Yeah.
So he recruited him. Now, I went and ran Commodore US, Commodore Inc., the consumer division from January of 1992. Right, I'd spent 5-6 days at the CES in Las Vegas, and then I went and took up my position in the office. And first thing I did was to go up and say hello to all the engineers. We had seven Amiga engineers, people like Dave Haney and Ed Hepler and people like that, right? Lovely people. We had 40 PC engineers.
What for?
You tell me. That's exactly my question. And the reason we had them is because Bill Sidness, they were mates of his from IBM, and he gave them all a job.
Yeah, I mean, you can see he was not a popular guy. So as we get to kind of the start of the 90s, Commodore creates a bit of a fundamental change in terms of how they do product planning. So what they used to do, pretty much Jack started it, was by going, building a product, going to CES to market test it, revamping it a bit, and then trying to get the Christmas sales. So using the input and making the adjustments to the product. Rather than doing this, what they decide that they're going to do is collect, instead of collecting it from feedback from CES, engineering will come up with a roadmap, and then they'll go to Commodore marketing to get the feedback, who in theory know their customers really well. Sidness reviews the AAA chipset and suspends activities, so it is late at this point. And so he requests recommendations, and long story short, what they come up with is, in the short term, they will do enhancements to Paula. In medium term, they're going to shift from the next systems being looking at AAA to actually using AA, which is really VGA equivalents. And then longer term, they will go with Hombre, which is a project run by Ed Hepler, which I'll talk about at the back end of this talk. So Lou Egerbrecht works with Jeff Porter on the AA Amiga roadmap. And so the planning is that they will have, at the high end, an A3000 Plus. So this is an A3000 with AGA graphics, DSP, and also support for a CD-ROM. Then they're going to have an A1000 Plus. And so that'll be a lower profile A3000 Plus, just with 2 slots, and it'll be sold at $1,000, which sounds all right actually. Then they have an idea around a low-end system, which is basically a cost-reduced A500 with an integrated Genlock, and the intent is to sell it for $50 less than the Amiga 500. And so originally they did have the A4000. The original A4000 was going to be the first AAA system, and they shelved that for the time being. So this will be Dave Haney talking about the roadmap changes.
Spring and summer of '91, when the new management came in And maybe for a week that seemed like, okay, well, I don't care who I'm building these for as long as they want stuff built. And then I found out they didn't really want stuff built, and there was actually an edict put out that if anyone was caught putting an Amiga 3000 plus in an Amiga 3000 case, it was grounds for termination. I had one in my garage back at home, but they weren't inspecting that, I guess. But it was crazy. They were like so against like this computer that I've been working on for 6 months, I guess at that point. That was early '91. Yeah, being ever considered something that was going to hit the market, because they hadn't decided yet. There's another one, even better. Well, not better, but I think a better product for the market was the thing that we were calling the Amiga 1000 Plus. It was a lower profile machine based on A3000 and AA technology. That was going to be two slots, 32-bit processor, fast RAM, $1,000 with a detachable keyboard. So a little more expensive than a 500, way cheaper than an A3000 or an A4000. And I thought that was going to set the world on fire. And that one was completely outright canceled. And in fact, the guy who was working on it, Joe Augenbraun, was, I think, depressed enough that he left the company after that. I didn't blame him.
Anyway, rough times for Amiga engineering. So in 1990, when they released the A3000, and then also in 1991 when the CDTV hits the market, you can see really that Commodore revenues have gone down a little bit, but not by too much, 939 million, 4% profits, but then 1991, they're barely making a profit with similar revenues. So you can see they're now starting to get into trouble again. So this is a memo from Bill Sidness. So it says, you can be proud of the recent tangible results of the hard work which the team has contributed over the last few months and years. On Wednesday, August the 28th, we successfully demonstrated a Medi Ali, an A300 HD, and a slimline replacement product. Both of these were extremely well received. On Thursday, August 29th, I had an opportunity to demo I had a demo of the new AA chips in a revised A3000. The visual output was outstanding. Clearly, we must put this into our product line rapidly, without impact to our current commitments, etc., etc. So
he cut down 500. He had some good ideas. Like he basically wanted to build essentially a zero cost almost zero cost fully analog Genlock built into it, so you could hook it up to your home tape player. But the idea was the cost was going to be $50 less than the A500. When the new management came in, they saw this, said, "Oh, look, a smaller A500, we can make it cheaper," and then they proceeded to add all kinds of crap into it. And that's how we got the A600, which cost $50 more than the A500. And so the only way they could sell it was by discontinuing the A500, which was still, it wasn't new, but the A500 Plus was still selling. They said, oh, well, if we don't discontinue that, no one will buy the A600 because the A600 costs more. So they discontinued the A500 that was still selling. And the A600 was out, but nobody wanted it. And because of some screw-ups they made with the whole delay of the what we call the Pandora chipset, the AA is what all the Commodore people call the chipset, and AGA is what the marketing people called it. Because of the delays, they didn't have enough of those chips, which Commodore wasn't making them. We were making them at Hewlett Packard, or the Andrea chip. I mean, not the Alice chip anyway. And so there was a severely limited supply of A1200s. Which was causing all kinds of problems because we couldn't sell the computer everybody wanted, and we had all these computers that nobody wanted. I realized in post, years and years and years later, a lot of people like the A600 because they're compact and they could throw a flash drive in there, but originally it wasn't a popular idea.
In 1991, there were changes to the changes. So So you have these are machines that are meant to be released in 1992. So you heard before, so we have the A3000 Plus, SCSI, AGA, digital signal processor, CD-ROM. Then we get the A1000, which is the low profile 2-slot version. Then we have the A300, as you just heard Dave Haney talking about. So as you just heard from Dave Haney, they eventually then come out with the A600. So rather than being cheaper, it's more expensive. It does have ECS, but they replace the they replace the sidecar with PCMCIA. And what's noticeable about that is, or what the motivation was behind that was, Commodore was seeing third-party product vendors like GVP creating accelerators and other peripherals for the A500, and they're going, we should have that. It shouldn't be them. It should be us. And so literally, they yes.
The guys from GVP came from Commodore. Sorry, but they should have looked after them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, that wasn't the mentality. Unfortunately, and this comes to bite them later. Sorry to foreshadow. So then they take the A1000, and rather than it being a cut down version of the A1000 Plus being a cut down version of A3000 Plus, they move it to being the A2200, right? And so it's like that, except that it's going to be ECS, not AGA. And basically, the Europeans have a mini revolt. They go, we will not sell this thing. We will not sell this. They already had the reaction. Obviously, in the UK, they had the A500 Plus, where they were kind of battling for the low end. So they didn't really want to sell the A600s at all. And so Sidness essentially gets fired over this. So he's built these products, and the company refuses to sell them. So then Commodore is scrambling. They then eventually released the A4000, and so the A4000 kind of looks like the A3000 Plus was going to, except that it's not SCSI, it's IDE. It's got AGA, which is definitely good, and it has a CD-ROM, which is good. So, but no DSP to be seen. So that's what gets delivered in September '92. Now, after seeing really what had gone on with both the A2200 and the A600, Commodore go with the wedge again, and they really quickly try and build a system that is going to support AGA. It's what all the punters want. It's also what they've been, from a marketing perspective, it's what they've been promoting. AGA is coming, right? And so people now want AGA. So, 1992, and we're getting close to the end. So 1992 is a pivotal moment for Commodore. Earlier they had moved manufacturing from Hong Kong to Philippines to save money. And what they found out, well, unfortunately they couldn't have predicted that there was a massive volcano that essentially completely disrupted their Philippines manufacturing. But the other thing that they should have been able to predict was that the airport in Manila could not handle the logistics of getting cargo in and out of, of that scale. And so Commodore is getting in big trouble post this volcano disruption. So they go to a third party called SCI in Scotland. And first off, Commodore places the wrong order for AA chips. So there's not enough chips for the A1200. So they've been using HP to fab the Lisa. So they only really have enough AGA chips to produce 70,000 A1200s for Christmas, which is a relatively low number considering how popular the Amiga had been. And Christmas is also, for Commodore, a really important time for them in terms of where they capture a lot of spend. Ali directs manufacturing to build A600s to meet the Christmas demand, and basically they manufacture so many that the market cannot absorb them. And so Commodore, as I said before, they had really been spruiking AGA. They had not been spruiking ECS. And so what this really results in, as well as all the other politics that are going on around, we don't want to sell A600s, basically very few A600s get sold. And they essentially get written off. Well, we ain't done yet. So, but that is obviously the Osborne effect, right? Like in terms of promoting AGA and then you don't get it out and next thing you know, everyone's waiting for AGA. So the other thing is, as I mentioned before, Commodore are now promoting the A570 CD drives, but they've end-of-life the A500 and the A600 does not have an expansion port. So this is a problem. Also, because Commodore have used SCI to manufacture all these A600s, they are now struggling to pay the bills because they can't sell these A600s. So this leads to then constrained capacity of them manufacturing A1200s. So it really is the perfect storm for them. This is just a very quick little clip from Nostalgia Nerd in September 93, reading a letter from a user on AGA.
A quick question. I want to get my hands on a 1200 with an 80 megabyte hard drive, but would it be worthwhile waiting for the AA Plus and the AAA chipset versions? Probably not.
So definitely not waiting for AAA. So then finally, we're getting to the home stretch now. So for the Motorola 68000, it had been the foundation for both home computers and workstations throughout the 80s. But it was starting to get a little bit long in the tooth, and in particular in floating point performance, which was starting to get more important. And elsewhere in the industry, RISC was the thing, right? It was really promising a step change in performance. So SGI really led the way in terms of MIPS-based systems being released in '86, and similarly Acorn and the Archimedes in '86 as well. And even Sun, you know, they had a bit of a religious war, and this is a favourite topic of mine, but they had a really a religious war internally at Sun in regards to, do we stick with the 68000? And they literally had a skunk works operation outside of Sun to get Spark going, and they actually had products around this. Should we go to Intel? So they were looking at the Sun 386i. I've never seen a 486i before. And so even Motorola themselves, they were starting to promote the 88000. I don't know too many users of the 88000. I know DG used some of them in the Avions, and yeah. I know also that when, and I think Next Computer, in their plans, if they were going to evolve the slab, I think they were planning on putting an 8800 in, an A8000 in there. So that brings us to Hombre. So 1993, I mentioned Ed Hepler's project before. So as AAA's late, the goal of exceeding VGA is not met. And Hombre is a final attempt to build a next-gen architecture. Advanced 64-bit multimedia system with a 3D graphics chipset, aimed specifically at games. And they're expecting silicon in late 1994 with a system release in 1995. It's flexible enough to actually support a variety of different platforms. And in the actual, the platform spec, which you can find on the Internet Archiving, there's about 6 or 7 different designs that they have, but they only agree to do 2, which I'm going to go through shortly. So a few targets that they were looking at. One was a CD-ROM-based console, which is going to call this CD64. And it's anticipated to have similar performance to a PlayStation, so 30 million 3D rendered pixels per second. And then also a high-end PCI graphics card accelerator that you'd put into either an existing PC or workstation that has a PCI bus. Very different philosophy to AAA. So no interest in 68000 compatibility. Planar is now getting very old. New sprite engine completely incompatible with the Amiga. And really the thinking at the start is a bit like what I was talking about with that option board on AAA. If they want to have Amiga compatibility for any system that they're going to do this on, then maybe they'll do that as an add-on card. But they really did want to focus on PCI at this point. They evaluated almost the entire market of embedded RISC CPUs, and they settled on the PA RISC, a particular model of PA RISC, which basically had a PA RISC core and then an available area for being able to put custom logic on there. And actually, this may sicken some of you. One of the reasons why they didn't go embedded PowerPC, embedded versions did not yet have Windows NT compatibility. Well, like for the add-on card that they were thinking about doing with Hombre, that Windows NT would have been one of the initial primary targets. Yeah.
Yeah, RISC-7300 also had a SIMD unit which was very interesting. And also,
He was using RISC.
RISC also.
An HP 728 area. From the RSC.
There was also allows you to microcode 68K code a lot easier too.
Yeah, and they had been talking about doing a lot of recompiling on that note. Whether it would actually receive any form of port of Amiga OS was actually in question. And so obviously the engineers were thinking about exactly along those lines. Could we recompile? Like obviously they're not going to do 68,000 binary compatibility. But the management were sitting there going, why do we need Amiga OS? Because we're thinking about consoles and add-on cards at this point, right? So anyway, so by early 1994, Hombre was 2 revisions in. So they had actually started to develop it. And really it was there were 2 primary chips in the chipset. So Nathaniel is the logic around here, and then there's a separate Natalie chip. So you have one main controller that's basically the PA RISC chip, DMA engine, and then you can see those capabilities there. And then they have a separate display chip, and then the other item is a peripheral controller. In terms of the systems that they're looking at with Hombre, and these were the 2 ones that they were targeting. This last one they hadn't agreed that they were going to go forward with. So the first one was a CD game based MPEG player. So essentially a set-top unit. And then they were also thinking about a multimedia graphics accelerator, as I was saying before. It's very like I literally screenshotted these out of the PDFs on the Internet Archive. They've got all the design documents for Hombre and AAA for that matter there as well. But there's a lot there. Anyway, we kind of start to know where this story's going. In 1993, Commodore did $590 million worth of revenue and a 60% loss of revenue. And then they didn't get too far into 1994. And unfortunately that brings us to Commodore declaring bankruptcy in April 1994. I could throw it out to the crowd briefly, just to see what, and by the way, I'm not totally done yet, but where did it go wrong?
They didn't go low end enough. They needed to build the ecosystem. They kept killing it off by themselves.
Yep.
The management didn't think of the ecosystem.
Yep.
They just thought of money. If you grow the ecosystem, money comes along.
Yeah, I understand. Yep. Yep.
Is that too obvious?
No. I think it's a good statement. Yeah. What?
I've long thought that being vertically integrated like they were and focusing on building custom hardware and stuff, they were on a path to destruction.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
Can only go so long.
They had a great operating, well, I mean, so many did, you know, you're seeing labs and
Yeah.
all the other. They had a great operating system, and they were probably making too much money buying their own chips.
Yeah.
If they'd followed a path to using commodity
Exactly. Couldn't write the labels from commodity. Yep.
GPUs.
Moss had had to stay for them. And you know, even there's data there that I hadn't seen before that I'm aware of now around Moss having trouble getting underneath a micron and things like that.
Yep.
Should have done what next to.
What were you going to say? Exactly what he said.
No, not quite, mostly. But also, yes.
I mean, so come there
yes,
then.
but also, they needed someone more than just an axeman at the front. Someone that had
Yeah.
a product vision and not doing things like releasing the A600, because it said the big one thing you didn't mention is developers. Because the developers lost a lot of interest as soon as they said, oh, and low end is going to be another 16-bit ECS, 16-bit.
Another A500 basically.
Yeah, and they didn't upgrade the Pluto either. So all of the software developers are going, why do we want to put things on this platform?
Yes.
Where there's
It's
very low
done.
sales and the hardware's not really
A lot of work.
Yeah.
No, not just a lot of work, but you know, you look at a A600, it's 16-bit bus. you can't move that much data.
That's right.
All the multimedia and stuff that's coming along, however you plug it into the machine, or can't.
It's a lot of work to make it perform.
Well, you can't.
And
To a certain point. It's what you can do on another platform like a PC at the time or
they
a
did it
Mac.
a RISC-y.
Yeah.
So,
PC.
Needed more than an maximum.
This is, I can agree with all that. And so, noting that I'm close to time,
Stock went through the ceiling. The Commodore stock went up and split a couple of times. In fact, Jack and his three sons had a tradition that whenever the stock went up 10 points, they would all stop and share a bottle of Dom Perignon champagne. And I'm privileged to say I was with them several times when they did that. That was pretty cool, and it's a kind of an interesting symbol of the growth that we were achieving. We were not just growing the market. We weren't just giving millions of people a computer that they couldn't afford before. We were also making a lot of money for investors and showing that this was a profitable enterprise.
Jack Tramiel had done his Apple killer. It was the Commodore 64. He's done with Apple. We used to say, Apple who? I mean, that was it. They were cooked in our book. And it's true, and we did 27 million C64s, whereas Apple II might have sold 5.5 million or something. So we didn't need another game machine. What Jack wanted was Sir Clive Sinclair's spot now, and he had the little Spectrum and things, and he's like, I want him next. Right, I want that. And so the C116, if you saw it when Schroz pulled it out and showed it to me, it was this big. It was the Raspberry Pi of the day. It was supposed to cost $49. It had chiclet keys, but it had 121 colors, had built-in sound all in one chip. It was basically a chip with a computer built around it, which back then it used to be just lots of chips, right?
The company got more and more successful, and more perks came up, like as my father called it, the pet jet, although it probably should have been called the Commodore 64 jet. But that didn't sound as good. Irving would demand use of the pet jet whenever he could. And Dad didn't like this. It did not fit with his, morals of what the right thing for a company asset to be used for.
Then there was the one with the full-size keyboard, and TED meant text display. It was supposed to be a business machine. You want to play games, get a 64. As a matter of fact, the price is completely different, right? But we're not trying to compete with ourselves. So Jack had that focus that he knew what he wanted to do with the market.
I think both Commodore and Apple had in 1983, so the CS was in January of 1984, had just each cost $1 billion in annual sales. As I like to point out, Commodore doing it with machines that cost a tenth as much as the Apple machine, so a few more machines being sold.
An argument going on between Jack and Irving upstairs in the booth, and I was there and suddenly I was on the demonstrating, and suddenly I got somebody came over and said, "You've got to come up and explain, the +4 to them." So I went up and I didn't really know Irving. I knew Jack a lot better, and so I went through my spiel, explaining what it was, what we wanted it to do, how it was going to prop up the price of the C64. And, they both, the people in the room listened, and then I was dismissed.
There was a celebration for Commodore's, I guess it was 25th anniversary at the time, or 30th, if I do the math quickly. And Dad gave Irving an ultimatum and said, you can't use company assets as if they're your own. As long as I'm president, you can't. You have to stop. So either you stop doing it or I quit. To which Irving said goodbye.
Anyway, I'm right at time, guys. I would love to do both talking about this as well as questions. Very briefly, David Pleasance's stuff, Jimmy Marsworth looking up the digital antiquarian. Brian Bagnall, amazing. He's done 4 books, in particular the Amiga years and the final years. And then those 2 documentaries. That was a clip from the Commodore story just now. Internet archiving, as I said before, has a huge number of documents, first-hand documents you can look at. You can see posts from Dave Haney still on Usenet if you know how to access that. I'm not going to explain that right now. And I did leverage Lemon 64 a little bit. That's it. If anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me later. I think I've got a wrap now. But thanks everyone for attending.